How do you make a perfect trilogy? That's a great question, and honestly, it's tougher than it looks. In this video, we're gonna break down what makes a story work across 3 films, and figure out why some trilogies become legends, while others fall apart by the third act. In cinematic history, numerous examples of great trilogies exist. Lord of the Rings, the original Star Wars, maybe you can argue that The Godfather is there, but with the first two being exceptional, the third one is more grounded. Anyway, there's a formula for doing it right. Let's talk about how to make the perfect trilogy, and why most directors don't even come close. In the world of animated cinema, few franchises achieve the emotional, narrative, and visual consistency needed to craft a truly great trilogy. Yet How to Train Your Dragon stands apart, not only as one of DreamWorks' finest accomplishments, but also as a storytelling blueprint for how to build a perfect trilogy. Across 3 films, it delivers a coherent arc of character growth, thematic resonance, and cinematic innovation. This video essay explores the individual brilliance of each film, how the trilogy evolves with emotional and narrative sophistication, and how it serves as a model for crafting long-form storytelling through cinematic theory. Crafting a perfect trilogy is one of the most difficult feats in storytelling. Many sagas start strong but falter in their sequels, often due to repetitive plots, rushed character arcs, or a lack of emotional evolution. However, DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon trilogy stands as a blueprint for how to do it right. The first How to Train Your Dragon is a masterful introduction to the world of Berg and its inhabitants, setting the emotional and thematic foundation for the entire trilogy. At the center of the story is Hiccup, an awkward, intelligent teenager who doesn't fit the mold of the traditional Viking warrior. His people view dragons as deadly enemies, and the community's entire identity revolves around hunting and fighting them. However, when Hiccup wounds a feared Night Fury dragon and finds himself unable to kill it, everything begins to change. Instead of finishing the job, Hiccup chooses to help the dragon, whom he names Toothless. This decision marks a key turning point, not just for Hiccup as a character, but for the entire Viking dragon dynamic. Through empathy and patience, Hiccup names Toothless not with force, but with trust. Their silent bond, built through gestures, flying sequences, and mutual respect. The training montages where Hiccup learns about dragon behavior while secretly befriending Toothless are both funny and touching, reinforcing the idea that the understanding and peace come from connection, not domination. The first installment doesn't try to do too much. It focuses on character relationships, especially the bond between Hiccup and Toothless, and uses that emotional core to build its fantasy world. The audience falls in love with the setting because they care about the characters living in it. For any trilogy, this first act must set the emotional tone and thematic backbone. Without the heart, spectacle is meaningless. According to Sitfield's paradigm of 3-act structure, the first act setup must establish the protagonist, their world, and their dramatic need. In How to Train Your Dragon, Act 1 masterfully fulfills this. Hiccup is introduced as an outsider, a classic underdog archetype, living in a Viking society that defines strength through violence. His dramatic need isn't just to fit in, but to reconcile his internal moral compass with a world that rewards conformity. The first film adheres to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the call to adventure, enduring Toothless, refusal, not killing him, and the mentor figure, his growing bond with Toothless acting as an inner guidance. But what sets this apart is the emotional architecture. The dragon, normally a symbol of chaos or danger in myth, becomes a metaphor for misunderstood connection. The world building enhances the theme. Dragons are not monsters, they're mirrors. The entire first act of the trilogy is about empathy replacing fear, and identity rising from internal truth rather than external validation. From cinematic standpoint, director Dean DeBlois employs visual storytelling over explosion. The silent bonding scenes between Hiccup and Toothless echo the language of pure cinema, a reliance on gesture, eye contact, and spatial framing to convey transformation. The animation itself isn't just a spectacle, it's a narrative expression. This attention to theme, character, and visual language makes the first entry feel emotionally full yet narratively open. The second film of a trilogy should never just repeat the first with a bigger budget. It must challenge the characters and push them into new emotional territory. How to Train Your Dragon 2 does exactly that. The second installment is not just a sequel, it's an evolution. Set 5 years after the original, How to Train Your Dragon 2 matures with its characters and its audience. Hiccup is now a confident young man, still adventurous and idealistic, but unsure about stepping into the role of chief after his father, Stoic. The film wastes no time establishing that this is a more expensive world both visually and thematically. Early on, Hiccup discovers a secret dragon sanctuary and reunites with his long-lost mother Volka, who has devoted her life to rescuing dragons. This family reunion adds a depth to Hiccup's identity and reshapes how he sees his place in the world, not just as a bridge between humans and dragons, but as someone with a legacy of compassion. Meanwhile, a new antagonist emerges, Drago Bloodless, a ruthless dragon hunter who believes fear and control are the only way to dominate both humans and dragons. His worldview stands in direct contrast to Hiccup's belief in understanding and peace. The second installment, How to Train Your Dragon 2, follows the classical function of act Act 2, Confrontation. The stakes are raised, alliances tested, and the hero is forced into transformation. In cinematic theory, Act 2 is often the meat of a trilogy, where the world expands and the protagonist must face internal contradictions. The sequel complicates everything. Hiccup meets his mother, learns that the world of dragons is even vaster than he imagined, and confronts Drago, an antagonist whose philosophy is the inverse of his own. In Robert McKee's terms, from story, a great story is one of progressive complications. Here, Hiccup's idealism collides with brutal realism. His desire to change others through empathy fails with Drago, who believes control must come through dominance. Toothless's first betrayal, killing Stoic while under control, acts as the film's midpoint reversal, a devastating moment that forces Hiccup to shed his innocence. The emotional core of the film, however, lies in the tragedy of Stoic's death. In a heartbreaking twist, a brainwashed Toothless, controlled by Drago's alpha dragon, kills Stoic while trying to protect Hiccup. The scene is devastating, not just because of the loss, but because of the guilt and heartbreak that follows. This moment forces Hiccup to grow up instantly. He can no longer rely solely on idealism. He must take tough decisions as a leader. The animation in this film is breathtaking, especially the fight scenes above icy landscapes and the massive dragon battles. Yet, the quiet scenes between characters like Hiccup's reunion with Valka or Stoic's serenade to her are just as impactful. John Powell's score once again elevates everything emotionally. Cinematically, the sequel expands in scale and tone. Roger Deakins, who consulted on cinematography, gives the film a more mature, textured aesthetic. The flying sequences are no longer simply joyful. They're layered with tension and responsibility. The emotional visuals, like Stoic's funeral, embrace visual symbolism, echoing classical tragedy. This is the Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy, not just darker, but deeper. The narrative doesn't just expand, it evolves. In cinematic trilogies, this middle act must destabilize everything that hero believes, and How to Train Your Dragon 2 does so with sophistication and emotional precision. In the end, Hiccup embraces his role as chief, proving that true leadership requires empathy, strength, and sacrifice. The film is darker, richer, and bolder than the first, setting a high bar for any animated sequel and preparing audiences for the inevitable maturity of the final chapter. The final chapter of the perfect trilogy must resolve, not repeat. The final film in the trilogy, The Hidden World, is a profound exploration of love, responsibility, and the pain of letting go. It begins with Hiccup and Toothless working tirelessly to rescue dragons from porches and bring them to safety in Berg. Now, a crowded sanctuary of humans and dragons living together. In cinematic structure, Act 3 is a resolution, not just of plot, but of the theme. How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, serves as the trilogy's denouement. It embraces a key storytelling principle: endings should be both inevitable and surprising. Hiccup, now chief, believes his dream of coexistence can last forever, but this belief is tested when he meets Grimmel, an antagonist who understands dragons so well he knows exactly how to destroy them. Meanwhile, Toothless discovers another of his kind, a beautiful, elusive Light Fury. Their budding romance is a charming subplot that mirrors Hiccup and Astrid's maturing relationship. Watching Toothless attempt to court the Light Fury without Hiccup's help is both hilarious and heartwarming, but it also signals something deeper. The bond between Hiccup and Toothless, as unbreakable as it once seemed, is starting to shift. Toothless is no longer just Hiccup's dragon. He's becoming a leader of his own kind. Grimmel functions as a narrative mirror. Unlike Drago, who used brute force, Grimmel is cold, strategic, and rational. He preys on emotional weaknesses. Hiccup's love for Toothless is now both a strength and liability. The symbolic gesture of Toothless living to be with the Light Fury represents a larger truth. Peace cannot always be maintained through human will. Sometimes love means letting go. This falls in line with Vladimir Prop's character theory. The hero must complete a quest that transforms the world and themselves. Hiccup achieves this through sacrifice, not triumph. Thematically, the final act resolves every narrative thread. Berg's dragons live for the hidden world. The fantasy is over, but emotionally, this is a bold move. The Blois doesn't fall into the everything goes back to normal trap. Instead, he acknowledges change as a permanent and necessary. Years later, a grown Hiccup visits Toothless with his family, and their shared fight becomes a wordless epilogue that closes the circle begun in film 1. From a film theory perspective, the trilogy concludes with a narrative arc that aligns with Aristotle's Poetics, a beginning, middle, and end, driven not by plot twists, but by characters' choices and thematic consequence. That's the mark of a masterfully built trilogy. The farewell between Hiccup and Toothless is one of the most emotional scenes in animated film history. It's not a tragic ending, it's a deeply mature one. Years later, Hiccup, now married with children, sails to the edge of the world and reunites with Toothless. Their silent recognition and shared flight one last time bring the trilogy full circle. This final film reminds us that love isn't about possession. It's about doing what's best for the one you love, even if it breaks your heart. With breathtaking visuals, emotional storytelling, and a perfect ending, The Hidden World closes the trilogy in the most meaningful way possible. In the realm of animated storytelling, few filmmakers have left as indelible a mark on a single franchise as Dean DeBlois did with How to Train a Dragon. Originally best known for his co-directing work on Disney's Lilo and Stitch alongside with Chris Sanders, DeBlois brought a unique sensibility to animation, one that emphasized emotional depth, character complexity, and a strong thematic through lines. His involvement in How to Train a Dragon transformed what could have been a simple children's film into one of the most emotionally resonant and narratively rich trilogies in modern animation. The original How to Train a Dragon book series by Cressida Cowell was whimsical, episodic, and deeply rooted in a childlike tone. DreamWorks initially envisioned the film's adaptation as a light-hearted, comedic adventure in line with the studio's previous hits like The Shrek and Madagascar. However, early development failed to capture the emotional core or narrative complexity that could sustain a long-term franchise. Recognizing this, DreamWorks made a critical pivot by hiring Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois, the creative duo behind Lilo and Stitch, film that similarly balanced humor, heart, and deep character relationships. When Sanders and DeBlois joined the project, they made a bold pitch. They wanted to completely overhaul the tone and structure of the film. This meant aging up the characters, raising the emotional stakes, and focusing less on slapstick and more on world-building character growth. The executives at DreamWorks took a leap of faith, and it paid off. Released in 2010, the first How to Train a Dragon became a critical and commercial success, praised for its emotional resonance, visual grandeur, and the powerful bond between its lead characters, Hiccup and Toothless. What set DeBlois apart as a director and later as the sole writer and the director for the second and third installments was his long-term vision. Unlike many franchises that treat sequels as afterthoughts, DeBlois approached the series as a complete narrative arc from the outset. He envisioned a three-part coming-of-age story where the protagonist would mature emotionally, physically, and philosophically across each film. Hiccup was never meant to remain the awkward outcast forever. Instead, he would grow into a leader, make painful sacrifice, and ultimately learn that love sometimes means letting go. DeBlois' storytelling philosophy aligns closely with classical cinematic theory, particularly the hero journey in three-act structure. But he adapts his frameworks for modern, emotionally driven animation. He places character growth at the forefront, treating animated characters with the same narrative seriousness as a live-action protagonist. How to Train a Dragon became a trilogy about empathy, change, and the inevitable distance that time and growth bring to relationships. Furthermore, DeBlois brought a refined cinematic eye to animation, collaborating with legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins as a visual consultant. He infused the trilogy with sweeping visuals, dynamic lighting, and a sense of scale that elevated the films far above conventional family animation. This approach not only differentiated the series stylistically, but it also signaled to audiences that How to Train a Dragon was aiming for more than just entertainment. It was aiming for emotional depth and artistic credibility. In essence, Dean DeBlois was not simply a director for hire. He was the architect of the trilogy's soul. DreamWorks' decision to trust him with such bold creative overhaul was a rare move in studios animation, where financial risk often outweighs artistic ambition. Yet, that risk yielded one of the most consistently acclaimed trilogies in modern cinema, animated or otherwise. Through DeBlois' vision, the How to Train a Dragon trilogy grew with the audience, evolving from a tale of friendship into profound exploration of love, identity, and letting go. Drawing from cinematic theory, How to Train a Dragon follows a classical three-act structure outlined by Sid Fields and echoes Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. The first film is the call to adventure and transformation through compassion. The second is confrontation, tragedy, and escalation. The third offers resolution through sacrifice, aligning with Aristotle's view that a complete story has a beginning, middle, and end, driven by characters' choices. The trilogy avoids redundancy by introducing something new in each film. The first is about discovery, the second about legacy, and the third one about letting go. It respects the audience's intelligence by allowing its characters to age, learn, and sometimes fail. Unlike most franchises that rely on nostalgia or formula, it dares to change tone, theme, and outcome. Emotionally, it respects pain, loss, and growth. Cinematically, it uses color palettes, lighting, and nonverbal storytelling to communicate character evolution. The dragons themselves are more than just creatures. They are reflections of the characters' fears, hopes, and choices. If you like this video essay, please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. It's an honor to make these videos for you. In the end, the How to Train a Dragon trilogy is more than just 3 animated films. It's one complete story about growing up, choosing empathy, and accepting change. It combines masterful storytelling with emotional honesty, cinematic beauty, and theoretical depth. For storytellers, it offers a roadmap. For audiences, it offers a cathartic, unforgettable journey. And for cinema, it stands as a near-perfect example of how to build a trilogy that truly soars.